It's looking a little different for me. Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter, and it's a Steven Lassan Monday, senior editor over at Athlon Sports. How's it going, Steven?
Mike, it's going great. Another fantastic weekend of SEC ball. We had 4 games decided by one score. The thriller in Tuscaloosa. We also had Red River, some fantastic night games. So, man, we're almost at the midpoint of the season. I guess it is. And I'm looking forward to what's to come, because if these chaotic weekends just keep stacking, I might need to have a cardiologist like on call or something.
Yeah, if any indication, Stephen, the last 2 weeks, man, this Saturday is going to be special because we got a ton of conference games, and they're nearly all a one-score spread. So perfect time to head on over to MyBookie, presenting sponsor of the show, MyBookie.ag, the online sportsbook, and most importantly, don't forget that promo code if you sign up, that SEC, THATSEC. They'll double your initial deposit over at MyBookie today. If you put in that promo code, that SEC is the number one way to help us during football season. Take advantage of this offer. And Steve, we're going to preview each and every game upcoming here in the SEC. We're going to have a lot of fun doing that. We've got updated playoff projections from Steven. We've got his updated panic meter, and he said, look, Mike, I think I'm getting too crazy with this panic meter. And I said, I don't think you're getting crazy enough. So can't wait to see what Steven has in store for that. But we're also going to we did, a third of the way, a quarter of the way. I can't remember what we called it, Steven, but we did awards. We're going to do that on this episode as well, because we're essentially at the midway point of the SEC season. But man, any thoughts on all that? Because we got a lot to cover, buddy.
We have a ton to get to, Mike. I was thinking ahead a little bit to this weekend. It was kind of funny seeing the schedule of Alabama, Tennessee, and Georgia and Texas. And I kind of thought, man, it's almost like, the NFL Championship Sunday. You get the AFC and the NFC at different times. It's like, man, there's these 2 top 10 showdowns that we're going to get this weekend and what it might mean for the rest of the season. But the last couple weeks of conference play, once it gets started, has been unbelievable with the close games, the overtime. So I guess even though I'm kind of sitting here wondering where the heck did half of the season go, we still have half a season to go still, but we've also got a lot of great matchups. So man, I'm so fired up for the second half of the season, and can't wait for Saturday to get here for the big ones too.
Right. And our MVP here, Steven, how about Cousin JR? What a guy. Just gifted another membership, this time to Joe C. Welcome to the family, Joe C. I think we had another one here, too. Appreciate you, Cousin Brad. Welcome to the family, becoming a member here. So, Cousin JR, he's my MVP. But, Steven, so let's get into our midseason SEC awards here. And so many candidates here, Steven. I mean, it seems like it doesn't matter each and every week during the early times of the season, it's different Heisman Trophy winners. And I don't even know if we're going to get a Heisman Trophy winner out of the SEC the way this crazy season is going. But who would you have as your top candidate? This was difficult for me, Steven. I don't know about you, but who do you think, as of today, maybe not projecting out, we're not saying, in December, this is where things stand. We're saying today, who's the number one Heisman candidate from the SEC in your mind?
Mike, this was pretty difficult, I have to admit. And I honestly don't feel great about somebody at one. It feels like there's a lot of really quality choices. So I kind of defaulted to, so far we've had this one big moment in the season, which was that Alabama-Georgia game. And Jalen Milroe was so special in that game. He is first in the SEC in quarterback rating. I think he's made progress as a passer under Kalen DeBoer, averaging nearly 9 yards a play every time he touches it. So I went with Jalen Milroe, but honestly, I would be happy to hear an argument for Quinn Ewers, Garrett Nussmeier, Jackson Dart, and some others in there too. But I went with Jalen Milroe. slightly over some of these other guys.
Let me tell you why you're wrong, Stephen, because last I checked, this man beat Jalen Milroe, outclassed him, outshined him, and he is just the spark of the SEC. Now, is this going to keep happening? I don't know. Fingers crossed. I hope it does, Stephen. But as of today, we're doing this October 14th. Give me Diego Pavia. As crazy as that sounds, I think he has earned it for being a dynamic player, Stephen. He is top 10 in the SEC right now in rushing. He's top 10 in passing, of course, being a quarterback, but he is the engine that is driving Vanderbilt's dynamic offense right now. Diego Pavia. But clearly you hate him. But thoughts on that?
Yeah, clearly hated. Yeah, the guy who's been trying to tell everybody for 2 years this Diego Pavia is a chaos agent and he's going to be a good player for Vanderbilt. He's actually, I didn't mention him intentionally because he's coming up in my awards here, but I can't really disagree with that. I mean, everything you said as far as value, production, he's showed up at the biggest moments for Vanderbilt this season. And I love the fact that Vanderbilt, after beating Alabama, went on the road and took care of business against a very good Kentucky defense. So, Mike, there is no disagreement from me. I don't know that it's necessarily going to continue. It feels like some of these other quarterbacks in high-profile matchups might get into the Heisman consideration. But I think maybe the biggest challenge here for the SEC and a Heisman contender is like it is a very crowded field, and at some point somebody's going to have to emerge. Quinn Ewers being hurt, so this feels very wide open here for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because again, do I think Diego Pavia is going to Heisman? Probably not. But again, I'm saying as of today, who would I give it to? And I want to give a shout out because it's basically is a quarterback award, and for some reason we diminish running backs unless they're Derrick Henry or something. But shout out Dylan Sampson. He is really driving Tennessee too. He leads the SEC in rushing, 699 yards, and he leads the SEC in rushing touchdowns with 15. And he is actually 3 away from the Tennessee all-time rushing record with half the schedule remaining. So, again, is Dylan Sampson going to win a Heisman? Probably not. But I think he should be on the radar, if nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the production and also the touchdowns, which I like to see a high number of scores in the Heisman discussion. But also, if you were discussing this and trying to figure out, okay, Heisman, Offensive Player of the Year, the fact that we've talked about all these quarterbacks and we just mentioned Dylan Sampson, it's almost like all these quarterbacks feel pretty much the same. And Dylan Sampson's kind of been so good at running back that maybe he'd be a pretty good pick at one. So no disagreement from me. I think either Dylan Sampson or one of those quarterbacks are probably a safe pick for the midseason Heisman in the SEC.
How about midseason SEC Coach of the Year? And really, in my mind, there's probably only 2 candidates, but I'm kind of curious to hear what you think.
I am going with Clark Lee of Vanderbilt from the hot seat by some people to 4-2 and midseason Coach of the Year. What just a turnaround for Clark Lee and this team. But also, I think, give him a lot of credit for the offseason building of this program, realizing that zero ego is needed. Go out and get the best coaches you can. Hire Jerry Kill, someone who's been a head coach before. You bring in Tim Beck as offensive coordinator. He's pushed the right buttons this offseason, and as a result, this is not the same old Vanderbilt anymore. They are a very difficult out week to week. I mean, they barely lost to Missouri. They beat Alabama. Very curious loss to Georgia State on there, but you start looking at their schedule, and there are some hard games, but if they can beat Alabama, they go on the road against Kentucky. They've got a chance to rack up some wins here. So I just think give Clark Lee a ton of credit for how far Vanderbilt has come this year. The win over Alabama. He's my midseason Coach of the Year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you won't get any disagreements. He's certainly 1A to 1B, but I was going to give it to Mike Elko, Stephen, because I think the A&M is getting better and better each week. They look like one of the better teams in the SEC, if not the country, in their last performance against Missouri. So we'll see if they can keep that rolling, if they keep getting better and better, which I think they certainly have the roster and the pieces to do that. But I thought I had their schedule here, but maybe I don't. If you were to tell me, Stephen, that A&M was going to be, 5-1 after their first 6, I think first of all, I don't think most SEC fans would have believed you, and I think most A&M fans would have taken that, and they're in prime position to make a big playoff run.
I think most A&M fans probably would have said you were crazy after the Notre Dame game to think they could be at 5-1. But also, I think that to kind of think about the award, the hallmark of a good coach is trying to figure out how to get better from like off season to the season, but also in season too. And it feels like A&M every week continues to find its identity and continues to build on last week's performance. They just seem to be getting a little bit better every week. We've seen this in the offensive line, the run game, Connor Wigman coming back, defensively. I mean, they've been, the defensive line, I think, continues to find itself over the course of the season. So I think Mike Elko proving in season and his offseason work together has this A&M team well positioned for a run at the college football playoff this year.
And extra credit for a defensive guy. It's not like he's Sarkisian or Heupel or Kiffin or something like that. But I think he's managed his quarterbacks extremely well. And again, I think that's even more impressive considering he's a defensive-minded coach. But it speaks to, just his overall like CEO type qualities, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think he has a really good pulse on his team, it seems like. And also, I think I gave Steve Sarkisian a little bit of consideration here. Sometimes it's hard because Clark Lee and Mike Elko have done such a great job this year, but sometimes in these seasons where we have this team that's projected to be good, they haven't lived up to the hype. Well, Texas has lived up to the hype too. So I did give Sarkisian consideration, but he was third on my list behind Elko and Clark Lee.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about worst coach of the year? I love to hand out these honors that no one else is giving out, but they should. Who's the worst coach in the SEC this year?
So I know where Mike's going, so I'm going to let him have that one. I'm going to take the other side of this one because there were two coaches that stood out to me, and I took Billy Napier of Florida. Obviously, the schedule was very difficult coming into this year, but we heard all offseason this was going to be Florida's best team. It was his best roster, and they were completely embarrassed in two home games to start the season, Miami and Texas A&M. Granted, they played a lot better at Tennessee on Saturday than I probably would have guessed, but at the same time, at this point of Billy Napier's tenure at Florida, you would have expected this program to take a bigger step by now. And also, going back to Saturday's game, fourth down play calling I'm sorry to be blunt, was stupid. And also the continued errors that we see on special teams to cost you points. So a game that Florida controlled early on and frankly could have won, some questionable coaching decisions cost them. So the combination of some preseason sort of projections and also in-season stuff, give me Billy Napier.
I think that's the most heated I've heard you since discussing Marcus Satterfield back in the day at old South Carolina. But I don't disagree with a word you just said. But I do disagree. Worst coach of the year. Come on down. Hugh Freeze, everybody's favorite here. Oh, my goodness. Loss after loss after loss. And I don't know if you saw this, Stephen. I missed it till just recently. Cousin Shane put it on my radar. But apparently he's come out and said, Missouri, Kentucky, and Vanderbilt all got lesser rosters, essentially, than Auburn. So, hey, they got lesser rosters. You ought to beat them, right? You better go on a 3-game winning streak after a comment like that. So, congratulations, Hugh Freeze. Made a deal with the devil down there. Now they're having to pay for it. But he's recruiting. 9 out of 9. He'd win all these games, but 1 out of 1, he's losing most of them. So that Hugh Freeze, not even a discussion for me.
I can't disagree with a word you said there about Hugh Freeze. I knew you were going there, so I figured I'll just clear the deck. I will let Mike slam this one home, and I'll just take Billy Napier in Florida. I did also find it humorous this week that Hugh Freeze was talking about Jarquez Hunter and the need to get him the ball more. Well, I mean, maybe you should go talk to the offensive coordinator or the guy that calls the plays at Auburn. But I think just in general, we came into the season looking at Auburn's schedule and the offseason upgrades with the roster. And there was opportunities there with Arkansas coming in and Oklahoma and Cal to get off to a fast start. And I think looking at their schedule, I think it's going to be hard for this team to get to a bowl game, which is a step back from last year. So I think definitely underachieving. And I think I'll be very curious to see where the second half of the season goes for Auburn, just kind of in program direction.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about SEC Offensive Player of the Year? Where would you go here?
This is where I am going with Diego Pavia. It's a pretty easy pick here, trying to pick someone different than Heisman and SEC offensive player. But you just look at his stats so far. You mentioned it, Mike. Top 10 in rushing, 10 touchdown passes, 1 interception, and just his value to this team. I think it's not just the production, it's the leadership, it's the spark, the belief that he gives Vanderbilt week to week. And he's a perfect fit for this offense because he played in it at New Mexico State. So Diego Pavia is my SEC Offensive Player of the Year for the midpoint of the season.
Hey, is this true, Stephen? Shout out Michael Riley, big Gator fan. Did you know Dabo's only losing season at Clemson, Billy Napier, was the OC? Do you know if that's correct?
He was definitely the OC there. That's a good question.
I just think that's hilarious if true. Not doubt Michael Riley, but I know you're the encyclopedia over here, so I figured I'd ask you. But yeah, I love that Diego Pavia. I would give him the award too. But again, how about just an acknowledgement again for Dylan Sampson, leading the SEC in rushing, leading in rushing touchdowns as well. And without him, I don't know where Tennessee would be right now. He is playing out of his mind, and for all the hype with Nico and all this, it's Dylan Sampson that is the one that is making Tennessee's offense go.
Absolutely, Mike. With all the concerns that this team is, having right now with offensive line and passing game and quarterback, Dylan Sampson has just been a rock and a steady presence for this offense. And shout out to Michael; he was absolutely spot on about that. It's always funny to me to think about the Napier plus Chad Morris, and Chad Morris' hire was critical for Dabo there at Clemson. So yeah, I mean, it's Napier did a nice job at Louisiana, but it's just not translating it at Florida.
All right, how about SEC Defensive Player of the Year?
I think there's a couple quality candidates here too, Mike. I'll be curious to see where you go with this one, but I'm going to pick Kyle Kennard, a defensive end from South Carolina. I considered Nick Scorton, Walter Nolan, I think also very much in the discussion. Kyle Kennard, 7.5 sacks, 11.5 tackles for loss, 14 quarterback hurries, according to Pro Football Focus this year. But like the production in key matchups, 1.5 sacks against LSU, 2 against Bama. So showing up at the big moments for this team. So give me Kyle Kennard, SEC Midseason Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, that's exactly where I went as well, Stephen. He's just seemingly unblockable at times. I mean, he's a game wrecker. It's very rare that one individual player is creating so much havoc for teams. And heck, they have to know it's coming at this point in time, but I don't know that they can really dedicate all their coverage to it because of Dylan Stewart and off the other side. So what a dynamic duo those two are. And they really, as we saw last week, and we have seen a couple times this year, I hate to give just credit to two individual players, but they raised the ceiling so much for what South Carolina can accomplish, obviously on the defensive side of the football, but as a team overall.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, coming into the season, we wondered how, South Carolina would improve defensively, what kind of tweaks Clayton White would they be able to build off last season. And they've been able to do that, especially with how they can get after teams at the line of scrimmage. And you're also seeing some growth out of some of those guys in the secondary too for South Carolina. So that's the challenge of playing this defensive line, is that if you take away Kennard, Stewart can come off the other side. You take away Stewart, you got to deal with Kennard. So this is a really nice South Carolina defensive line this year.
How about this is one you wanted to do, Stephen, SEC Freshman of the Year?
I think you got to go with Ryan Williams or Dylan Stewart, right? I mean, they've been so much of a kind of just breakout star, and I think you could throw Ryan Williams in there at breakout star as well. But just the big plays that Williams has brought, the ending against Georgia, and the week-to-week impact that Dylan Stewart makes as a true freshman off the edge. So either one of those two, I'd be willing to hear a compelling argument for either one.
Yeah, no, I would go co-freshman of the year as well. I swear I didn't see Steven's list before this, but we're mirroring each other here. But yeah, I mean, without Ryan Williams, I don't know where Alabama would be right now. To your point, Jalen Milroy's a fantastic player, and when he goes off, Alabama's I just think they're completely different. But yeah, I think they have a couple of losses without Ryan Williams on their roster. And as for Dylan Stewart, we just got done praising him, but man, what a game wrecker. And both these guys were elite prospects. So this is not like a total stunner, but it's a pretty stunning to see true freshmen come in and play at this high of a level right out the gate, particularly in conference play. It's just so unusual. But I'd have to. I don't think I could split it between them.
Williams is, I think about that Georgia catch so many times of just how special of a play that was. I mean, just the control, the ability to kick it into high gear and score at a clutch moment. You do know he's 17, by the way. So it's, he's, as we hear every weekend on the broadcast.
How about best coordinator at the midway point?
I'm going to go a little different here. Trying to recognize as many teams as we can here, Mike. I'm going to go with Travis Williams, the defensive coordinator at Arkansas. And I go with him because they got the win over Tennessee. Also in SEC games, Arkansas holding teams to 16.3 points a game. So this defense has been critical so far this year to getting the biggest win that Arkansas has. Also, I think you can make a case here for a couple guys too, like Tim Beck at Vanderbilt, Clayton White, Pete Kwiatkowski, defensive coordinator at Texas. So compelling case for any of those guys, I think.
Yeah, someone just said Bill Bedenbow. That's fantastic. I don't think there's anything wrong with that selection. We're turning into that Vanderbilt podcast, but I'm gonna give it to Tim Beck, Stevie, because I think, and heck, you could probably throw Jerry Kill in here as well. But just the 180 they have done with Vanderbilt's offense, it's just remarkable, and I hope they can keep it going. But this completely caught me off guard, and it's probably more Diego Pavia than anything. Just his, again, we can only say so many great things about him, but I'm going to give Vanderbilt all the due. They've earned it up to this point.
Yeah, we don't get to, over the last couple of years, probably haven't had too many chances to give Vanderbilt a lot of credit and talk about all the success that they're having. So I think with this year, with what Pavia is doing, but also I think Tim Beck's play calling has been really this is the kind of offense that Vanderbilt needs to run. There's been a lot of debate over the years about Vanderbilt. Do they need to go to the option? What do they need to do? This is kind of the good mix. It's get that kind of unbalanced sets, the formations that they use, using the run game, quarterback run game. And we saw this against Alabama. Like every time Vanderbilt needed a play, Beck seemed to have the right kind of play call dialed up. So definitely Pavia, but Tim Beck and Jerry Kill also doing good things behind the scenes too.
Now, how about the worst coordinator of the year so far?
Got to go with Coleman Hutzler over at Mississippi State. Yeah, some of this is just preseason. Like it was a curious hire to begin with, no coordinator experience in the SEC. And I certainly understand the challenges. Revamped roster, a lot of new faces, but they're giving up over 40 points a game. The success rate on this defense, 127 in the country for just overall performance, 131 against the pass in defensive success rate. So understand the new pieces, but this was a curious hire, and it's certainly working out that way each week for Mississippi State's defense.
Yeah, and I don't have much disagreement with that, Stephen. But again, that's kind of more or less what I expected, fair or not, from Mississippi State. Give me worst coordinator, Seth Luttrell, Oklahoma. Come on, Dale, Seth. What the hell we doing here? We can't score on anybody, and you can blame all the injuries you want, but this should never be where Oklahoma's at, to where we don't have a game-breaking running back. I don't know what in the world we're doing at quarterback. Offensive lines is inconsistent. We don't have any receivers. Now, again, receivers banged up. I get it, but this is just pitiful. This is, I mean, by virtually every metric, they're the worst offense in Power 5, and it's not even close. And I mean that surfaced in a big way in basically all their key games.
It's very difficult to figure out the sort of breaking point of injuries, personnel turnover, and how much of it is it on the offensive coordinator. Watching Saturday's game against Texas, they definitely broke out. It seemed like a few new things, and I think that that fits Michael Hawkins well. But also, it just goes back to, if you can't block and you've got no difference makers on the outside, they could probably change quarterbacks to have Garrett Nussmeier back there, and maybe he would be able to have some success. But I do think some of this is personnel, and I think what will be interesting to me is, as we go forward, Seth Luttrell is on the hot seat. I don't know if he's going to get fired, or I think a lot of Oklahoma fans want him fired. But I think what will be key is what kind of tweaks can he make over the second half of the season because there was some optimism coming out of that Auburn game that, hey, they might have figured some things out on the offensive line. Texas is maybe the best team in the country, certainly number one going into this week. So I think it's going to be incumbent on him to show some progress over the next couple of weeks, absent with the receivers and even with the offensive line question mark. So I think very curious to see what Brent Venables does here, because it's not very often that head coaches get to hire, 1, 2, 3 offensive coordinators, especially if you miss on 2 of those. So this would be strike one. If it doesn't work out, the next one would be really critical.
Mm-hmm. And then biggest pleasant surprise, I mean, I think it kind of goes without saying, is Vanderbilt. Is there anyone else you even considered?
I think it's just got to be Vanderbilt. We mentioned A&M too. Also would throw Arkansas, beating Tennessee. That was a really solid win for that program. But it just all goes back to Vanderbilt. Predicted to, have 2 or 3 wins in the preseason, potentially a top 25 team now, and the win over Alabama does it for me.
All right, biggest disappointment, who is that?
It's got to be Auburn. Year 1 to year 2, not a ton of progress so far. I certainly get the recruiting angle to this and stockpiling talent, and maybe Auburn is what Miami is doing now, which is you stockpile talent for 2 years. The switch kind of goes on in the coach's third year. We'll see. But 2-4, considering the schedule that they had, I think is a major disappointment.
How about this one though, Steven? Because I don't disagree. Throw Florida in there. I thought Florida would be much better than they've shown. But how about Kentucky, where it feels like they're wasting a really, really good defense? Again, we expect them to go to the playoff this year? No, but this is, year 12 for Stoops. I mean, just what we're doing on offense, I don't think there's any excuse for it. It's just been pitiful time and time again. And essentially they hit one big play on Ole Miss. That's why they won the game. And hell, right after, Lane Kiffin said, well, they've never done that before in their lives. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I think I am most disappointed, quite frankly, with Kentucky, because I kind of saw Auburn coming.
The interesting thing about Kentucky is, and you was looking at the schedule you had up there, they're a play away from beating Georgia, and they beat Ole Miss, and they've lost to Vanderbilt, and frankly, they were and Vanderbilt, and also dominated by South Carolina. So just kind of a bizarre start to the season for this team. They feel like one of those teams that is very hard to get a read on week to week. But in general, I think this goes back to the offense and the offensive coordinator hire. I was not a big fan of the Bush Hamden hire. I think the jury is still very much out. And also his ability to take Brock Vandagriff and develop him. He's been banged up, but that's going to be critical over the next couple of weeks, especially like you said, with this defense that they have.
Mm-hmm. Well, all right, Steve, we got to move on because we got a lot to get to, but I actually did some work this morning, so be proud of me. I got my updated SEC scoring efficiencies. Didn't have it last week, but again, very top right. I think people are confused. It's not the entire square, essentially. It's all the top right, you're elite. It's the bottom left, you're awful. And the only one trending very close to that is Mississippi State. But again, very, very simple metric here. How many snaps you've had on offense? How many points are you scoring? How many snaps are you facing on defense? And how many points are you allowing based on those snaps? And clearing away, it's Texas. Texas is elite. There's no doubt about it after 6 weeks. And then Tennessee, Ole Miss, right there trailing, but closest to Texas with Alabama. And they're in highly, highly efficient offense. Defense, different story, but the offense is out of this world. It's technically the best scoring offense in the SEC. And then we just got a jumbled mess over here, Steven. And Georgia kind of confuses me. They're trailing a little bit. I think people, I don't know if they're waking up to it, but I feel like I've awoken to Georgia is just something's wrong with Georgia. I'm not saying they're a bad team, not saying they're going to miss the playoff, but at this point, it quite frankly, it wouldn't even surprise me if they dropped a game or two here moving forward. And what stands out to you about these updated SEC scoring efficiencies?
I think the first thing is seeing Texas over in that elite category. I think through everything that we've seen through the first 7 weeks of the season, that's the best team in the country right there. Certainly, I think Georgia will have something to say about that. But just based upon how they played and Sarkisian's roster building, this is the best team in the country and is bared out by this stat right here. But also, I think the clustering of these teams in all these sectors, there's a lot of quality depth here. Just looking at where A&M is in relation to Missouri and Arkansas and South Carolina, and also just seeing Georgia not in that elite category. Seeing Ole Miss there, I was surprised maybe we didn't talk about Ole Miss as one of the biggest disappointments of the first half of the season too, because of having 2 losses at this point of the year was pretty surprising to me. So I think that in general, this tells me Texas is what the eyes tell me. Texas is the best team so far, but also there's a lot of really quality depth in this league. And it kind of goes back to something you and I have talked about, which is these teams are going to beat up on each other a lot in the second half of the year.
Mm-hmm. And quite frankly, I mean, heck, we've already seen it with Kentucky beating Ole Miss, with Arkansas beating Tennessee, with Vanderbilt beating Alabama, and Texas being the only undefeated in the conference. That I think it speaks, and Mississippi State giving Texas and Georgia, I don't want to say those games were highly competitive, but they didn't get blown out. I think that speaks to exactly what you're saying, where just about anybody can beat anybody this year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, Kentucky taking down Ole Miss, Vanderbilt is beating Alabama, Mississippi State, which I think most people would consider the 16th best team in the SEC, gave Georgia a lot of trouble, gave Texas some trouble early. So I think it speaks to the quality of depth in this league, which is aided by the transfer portal in recent years. You've got the coaching changes, NIL, conference realignment, all those factors I think have played a role in this, which is why I think week to week, you're probably going to see a lot of close spreads like we're seeing for this Saturday, and also just a lot of like chaos week to week, which isn't a bad thing for people like us, fans too.
All right, Steven, next we're going to get to your updated college football playoff projections. But before we do that, new sponsor to the show, highly, highly recommend these guys. It's Cornbread Hemp. Steven, this is a Kentucky-based business, and what they do, they sell CBD and THC gummies, and they sent me some over of the CBD sleep gummies, and I literally could not recommend these enough. They're not psychoactive, whatever that is, to give you a buzz. They just help you sleep. They're non-addictive. It's got no melatonin. I even told you a little while ago, Steven, that I'm doing these, and again, they sent these to me for free, and when it's up, I'm going to take advantage of this offer for 30% off, Steven, at what is the web address? cornbreadhemp.com/SEC. Use that promo code SEC for 30% off your order. There's no synthetic ingredients. This is Farm Bill compliant and legal for adults over 21. Cannot recommend Cornbread Hemp enough. You got any questions, reach out. I'm happy to answer. I don't work for them, but I just love the product. And again, if you're looking for a healthy way to enjoy a carefree moment, check out Cornbread Hemp. And I love that this is a small business out of Kentucky. And again, that web address, cornbreadhemp.com/SEC, to get 30% off your order. I can't guarantee it because it's not my product, but I can guarantee that it's a good product because I use it all the time.
Mike, I think there might be a Kane W from Tuscaloosa ordering that to get some better sleep this week.
Yeah, you could use some of that, Kane. Trust me. Yeah. All right, Steven's updated not even SEC, but college football playoff projections. Texas remains number 1. And I always got to say this because you never know if someone's seeing this for the first time. But the way the playoff format is, it doesn't matter if, let's say, Georgia's number 2 in the country or Alabama's number 3. This is the way they've decided to slot this. The top 4 seeds, top 5 conference champions get in here, and the top 4 are all it can only be one conference, if that makes sense. So Texas, number 1, as the projected SEC champ. Oregon, which just took down Ohio State, as the projected number 2 Big Ten champ. Miami, number 3, projected ACC champion. Kansas State, number 4, projected Big 12 champion. And then number 5, Stevens dropped Ohio State. Georgia, 6. Penn State, 7. Alabama, 8. Clemson, 9. LSU jumps into it at number 10, Notre Dame 11, and Boise 12. So that would mean that Alabama would host Clemson in the first round. Georgia would host Notre Dame. We've seen that game a couple times in recent history. And then LSU would travel to Penn State. And I don't blame you, Stephen, but it still brought a tear to my eye to see Tennessee removed from the playoff, even though they won. What in the heck's wrong with you, Stephen? They're in the bubble, as is A&M. Ole Miss dropped, which, yeah, of course, and then Missouri. So we got a couple teams on the bubble here, but thoughts on these projections?
So, Mike, I have some good news for you, which is Tennessee is still very much alive for this playoff discussion. And I think something to keep in mind is that this weekend's game against Alabama could be a playoff elimination game because Alabama is going to get LSU. Obviously, Tennessee is going to get Georgia. It feels like the winner of this game's odds are going to increase given most of the matchups that they have the rest of the way. So I think you look at this week's game between Alabama and Tennessee is critical. You also look at Texas A&M and LSU in a few weeks. That game is also going to be very huge for playoff positioning because it does feel like, I mentioned the LSU-Alabama game, Texas A&M schedule is very favorable. They have to go, of course, to South Carolina, but they get Texas and LSU in College Station. So I moved LSU in this week because of their win over Ole Miss. And, of course, Tennessee, Ole Miss both fell out, but also still very much alive in this playoff discussion. So I would say check back next week. If you don't like this week's, check back next week because I think we're going to see a lot of changes in a few weeks.
Well, let me ask you this, because I would imagine there's a lot of fans wondering this. We got 4 SEC teams on the bubble. What's going to help them the most get some teams in here? Would it be Notre Dame losing? Would it be Clemson and Penn State? I mean, who do we need to be rooting to lose outside of the conference to get more SEC teams into this thing?
That is a great question. So I think if I am an SEC fan at like Tennessee or Alabama or LSU A&M, I am rooting for Clemson and Notre Dame to lose. Just looking at sort of where this stacks up right now. So keep in mind, you've got the 5 automatic bids by conference champions. I feel pretty good that Ohio State and Penn State are probably going to be in, barring some upsets the rest of the way. Those 2 teams play later this year, but there's also a pretty favorable path for both the rest of the season. So if you think about it like that, that kind of ties up about, 7 spots. So I think you've got to start rooting for Clemson and Notre Dame to lose. Notre Dame plays Georgia Tech this weekend, which could be difficult. They play USC later this season. They also get both Navy and Army, who are both very good this year. Clemson, pretty favorable path. And they still got to go to Virginia Tech. They still got to play potentially Miami in the conference championship game. So I think what worries me if I'm an SEC fan is both Clemson and Notre Dame have favorable paths, but they also have games that could trip them up. So I think you want those 2 teams to lose. And while I think we just talked about depth, I think you want like A&M to take care of business on the road against South Carolina. You want LSU to beat Arkansas this week. So the top isn't losing to the bottom teams, if that makes sense too.
Right. And I don't know if you saw this, Stephen. I like to say bold things, of course, but I predicted that Ole Miss going to win out, which would mean beating Georgia. We've already discussed, may not, again, not saying they're awful or anything like that. People don't believe in context. But again, they're very good, but I think Ole Miss has potential to be good as well. If Ole Miss wins out, which is not a given, but I'm not asking Steven Lassan to say they are winning out and predict it like I am. But if they go 10-2, if they win out, they beat Oklahoma at home, Arkansas on the road, Georgia at home, at Florida, and Mississippi State in Oxford. If they do that, big if, but does Ole Miss make the college football playoff if they win out?
I think so. I think 10-2 gets you in if you're Ole Miss, especially if you beat Georgia. And I think if you're Ole Miss, you're probably a big Georgia fan this weekend because if Georgia beats Texas and you can beat Georgia, just probably a compelling case that Georgia will be number 1 or number 2 at that point. So I think Ole Miss needs Georgia to win this game. It certainly helps. I guess it's not everything. And I do think there is a scenario too where 9-3 is probably going to be hard to get them in. But what if we have a lot of losses the rest of the way? Like what happens if Notre Dame finishes 9-3? Clemson. What about some of these other teams on the bubble? I think the Big 12 is going to beat itself up a lot down the stretch. So I think 9-3 probably doesn't get you in. But I think let's check back in November when we see some of these other teams start to beat up on kind of how all this shapes up. A 10-2 with a win over Georgia, I think that's a playoff resume there by Ole Miss with that win.
Mm-hmm. And then, one other thing, Stephen, a lot of people have asked me this, and I don't have the answer, so I don't know if you do. I apologize for just throwing this at you last minute here. But the playoff quarterfinals, so the second round of the college football playoff, so like Texas right now, slotted as the 1 seed. Are they guaranteed to get the winner of the 8-9 Alabama Clemson, or will they reseed this to where, let's say, Boise State pulls off some miracle and beats Ohio State? Would they face Texas as the 12th seed, or how does that work? Do you have any idea?
Yeah, unfortunately, no reseeding. So it is straight bracket like the NCAA tournament.
Mm-hmm. So, just another reason to hate this thing. Right. You threw the red flags up the moment they announced it, but I'm seeing people in the comments are like, who in the heck thinks Boise can beat any of these SEC teams? The answer is none, but they get a spot for some reason.
Boise State's pretty dangerous this year with Ashton Genty. If you haven't had a chance to watch him late at night, I guess they played Hawaii this weekend, and that was later than they're used to playing. But Boise could be dangerous in the right spot. But playing like a Texas A&M or one of these other teams would be pretty tough. So yeah,
we ain't scared of no Hawaii. I mean, that's a Vanderbilt opponent right there, and this was Vanderbilt before they were good. Could beat Hawaii. You know what?
Is that Billy Napier scared money don't make money? That's what he did. He played that way on Saturday.
And speaking of scared money, don't forget, again, MyBookie, presenting sponsor of the show. Head on over to mybookie.ag today. Put in that promo code ThatSEC. If you ain't scared to fade Cousin Shane, I mean, that's a lock right there. And Steven, who was your MyBookie lock of the week? I can't remember from last week.
Missouri.
Okay. Oh, yeah. So you covered easily. Yeah.
I played it safe this weekend.
Listen to Steven. Listen to me. I'm on a lock streak. But before we get to the previews, Steven, I love your panic meters. Who are you panicking about heading into week 8 here?
Mike, we have several teams to get to this week. Let's start with Alabama, because I've got them at a 9 on the panic meter here. A play or two away from losing to South Carolina a week after they lost to Vanderbilt. I expected to see a much better, frankly, I expected to see a little bit broader margin of victory on the scoreboard. And it just continues. This defense continues to be an issue. I mean, you can go down the stat sheet. Just one 3-and-out over the last 2 games. 14th in the SEC in rush defense. And in 3 SEC games, opponents are converting 47 of their third down attempts. Don't have to look at the stat sheet either. The eye test will tell you that too. It's a defense that is struggling, often seems like out of position. The secondary is obviously very young, but still, this is a defense that has way too much talent to be playing at this level. And I have it at a 9, largely because Tennessee comes up this week. They still have to play LSU. They get Missouri. If Alabama wants to make the playoff, this defense is going to have to play a lot better than it did the last 2 weeks. And just thinking ahead, Jalen Milroe can only carry this team so far this season. So it's got to be some major improvement on defense to think about contending for the national championship.
And if you had to put your finger on what is the main issue here, Stephen, is it certainly not the talent? Is it the coaching? Is it the transition from the greatest of all time to Mr. T-shirt? What is a big issue here?
Mr. T-shirt. I think it could be all of the above to some extent. It does feel like, and I think maybe Georgia is kind of, I don't say not necessarily struggling with this, but you also wonder sometimes, you think back to some of those really good defenses for Georgia and Alabama, like who is the game wrecker up front on the line of scrimmage that just causes havoc and disrupts everything? I think it's, Alabama, recently hasn't maybe necessarily had that guy, especially this year. Secondary, very young. Scheme change too. So, and just been a lot of criticism about being too predictable on defense too for Alabama. So I think all those factors in there, it's hard to kind of pinpoint one thing. It is very odd to see them have such a hard time on third downs though every week. That seems like a big red flag for me about maybe scheme and to some extent coaching too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I'm hearing some wild stuff, Steven. I mean, Apparently, DeBoer's got this right-hand man he brought with him from Washington, who's a defensive guy. There's some tug of war with the defensive staff and this guy now. So throw that into the mix. I heard a former SEC staffer who's worked at Alabama, Ole Miss, and Auburn. He described the situation as just basically the players are running the thing. Well, his words, not mine, but he said the inmates are running the asylum down there in Alabama right now. So take that for what it's worth. But
can I offer one other thing too?
Mm-hmm.
What about I don't want to say like team culture, but I want to say like program culture, because the standard was set under Nick Saban. Like, we are going to play dominant defense. Kalen DeBoer's defenses at Washington really weren't great. Chuck Morrell was, part of the defensive coordinator, and he was not calling the plays now, but I know he's at Alabama in an off-field role. It just feels like they're very much an offensive team. And it's also like Lincoln Riley at USC to some extent. Like, you have to set that expectation. You're going to be good on defense and set that bar. I don't know if that makes any sense, but maybe that's part of it too.
Yeah. All right. Shout out. So again, Stephen, the encyclopedia here. That's the exact guy I was talking about. That's what I didn't know even how to pronounce that guy's name. But yeah, Morrell. So again, I don't know. It doesn't look like it's getting fixed though anytime soon. And schedule's ramping up here quickly on Alabama. You know what?
It's going to take a lot of Jalen Milroe to save this team, because it does feel like they are going to go as Jalen Milroe goes. I know that's pretty basic, and he's, like I said, he's maybe the best player in the SEC for the first half. This defense, I think the secondary could get better, but also it's just hard to see this group being kind of as dominant as we're used to seeing.
Right. And the thing with Jalen Milroe, fantastic player. I put this out there. I believe it. He may be the best running threat in the entire conference. And that's saying something in this conference. I mean, I don't even think that's an exaggeration. I mean, you could throw in a couple guys like a Dylan Sampson, but I don't know. I'd almost rather have Jalen Milroe with that ball in his hand. But the problem is, and he's certainly capable. He's got maybe the best deep ball also in the SEC. But, man, he'll make a highlight play, and then he'll make a decision, and you're thinking, what in the world was that? And that was a lot of, I think, the consternation Nick Saban had with him. It wasn't, they try to coach him out of these things, and he's now 2 years in, and he's making the same poor decisions consistently, which is a real problem. Which, to your point, they could go as far as he could take them, and boy, did he take them much further than I thought he could last year. But yeah, can he do it? Again, it's, I don't know.
I think there also has to be maybe some pressure on Alabama's offense, knowing you might have to score every time you touch the ball, right? I mean, am I crazy to think anything about that? Like, Alabama just seems like a collection of problems. Maybe they're just not as good up front. They're young secondary scheme. Like, that seem logical.
I certainly, and I think, it looked like they had waved a magic wand and fixed all the issues, but they did lose a lot of guys to the portal.
Yeah.
And they brought some guys in, I get it, but I think we're seeing the effects of that, Steve, of just some key pieces lost.
It's harder for top teams, I think, to keep depth in the program. Like, everybody's going to struggle with it, and Alabama, certainly with losing Nick Saban, definitely did this offseason.
Mm-hmm. All right, so panic meter 9 for Alabama. Who else are you panicking about here?
Tennessee.
No, I agree completely.
Hope Cousin Shane was sitting down. I didn't mean to scare him. So I've got Tennessee at 8 on the panic meter here. I think, obviously, the defense early on in that game against Florida gave up some drives, made the critical stops. Florida's boneheaded coaching also played a part in that too. But offensively for Tennessee, something is missing from this offense. And I dug into the numbers for Nico, some of the advanced numbers this season, and a lot of it is when he has a clean pocket to throw from, he's completing over 70% of his passes. And so I looked at the blocking stats for Tennessee this year. John Campbell and Lance Hurd are 2 of the lowest rated tackles right now in the SEC, according to Pro Football Focus. And so there is a real problem right now for Tennessee on the offensive line. They've got to protect better. Nico's got to play better. Also, I think Tennessee as a team has 5 drops this year. But that's also an area they could clean up because you see what Dylan Sampson is doing on the ground. There's some potential here. So I am panicking because Tennessee is going, I think, looking at what's to come, if you think they lose to Georgia, they need to beat Alabama to make the college football playoff. So this is not a one game blip anymore. It has been going on for 2 or 3 weeks now for Tennessee. And so now my panic meter has significantly increased.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I got the schedule up here. Alabama, Kentucky, Mississippi State, all at home, at Georgia, UTEP at home, Vanderbilt away. The way they've been playing the last 2 weeks, stretch it to 3 if you want with Oklahoma. I'm confident they can beat Mississippi State at home. I'm confident they can beat UTEP at home. The rest, they could lose all of them, even Kentucky, the way they've been playing. So, yeah, I agree 100% with you, Stephen. I mean, it's 1 game's a fluke, two's a trend, three's a panic meter over here. And again, it would be a travesty if they don't get it fixed because they've been working to get this defense to. I never even thought the defense would be elite, to be quite honest with you, Stephen. I just thought if they had a top 25 defense, they could play with anybody the way they go on offense. And now they're here. Heck, they may have a top 3 or defense in the SEC, but they've got one of the top worst offenses the last couple weeks. So I don't know what in the world. I don't know how you fix it.
I think maybe the thing that would give me confidence if I'm a Tennessee fan is the fact that the defense is as good as it is. And if you're worried about Tennessee offensively, you have to think Josh Heupel can at least push the right buttons. Now, there's some things certainly you can criticize Tennessee and Josh Heupel for this year. But it feels like, at least maybe this is my overly optimistic view of every team. Like my overly optimistic view of Tennessee is it feels like they've got the right pieces, but you also look like when you have the sacks, you get behind the sticks, you can't get your tempo going. You misfire in one pass. They've had penalties. The receivers, it's just like a bunch of small things that kind of added up. It's almost like it's really hard to kind of pinpoint just one thing outside of just Nico needs to play better and they've got to get better offensive line production for sure.
Great question from Michael Raleigh. If you could combine Tennessee defense and Alabama offense, do you think they can win a national championship?
It's not. You might have something there. I'd still like Texas, and then whatever that team is.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's clear as day. I mean, here's the problem, Stephen. I mean, Nico got so much hype, and hell, check the tape. I was not among those saying, this game-changing quarterback to win the Heisman or anything like that. But he is clearly struggling. But again, it's six games into his career. I don't think it just seems like the first possession against Florida, they were driving right down. I think had they scored a touchdown there, the first possession where Nico coughed it up, had he not done that, had they scored a touchdown, I think they would have blown Florida out. But it's one of those deals where it's like one thing goes wrong, and then it just snowballs, and he's not seeing the field too well. Again, this is a young quarterback, but the system is designed to help these quarterbacks, and it doesn't seem to be helping right now. And they can't. They're getting abused on offensive tackle, and receivers are banged up. I mean, it's just. I don't know. I don't know that this is getting any better, to be quite honest with you.
Although the counter would be Connor Wigman looked pretty bad against Notre Dame in the season opener, and then he looked really good against Missouri. And I guess when you're dealing with very highly talented quarterbacks that have a pretty competent OC with some weapons around him, the switch could be flipped at any minute. So I guess I would kind of couch this is like, I haven't sold my stock in Nico long term. I'm a little concerned that he's having this kind of struggles at this point of his career, given what Tennessee has around him and kind of what we thought about him and what we saw last year against a good Iowa defense in a bowl game. I know you can't read too much into bowl games, but I think everything just seemed aligned for this Tennessee offense to get back on track, and it just hasn't happened this year.
Mm-hmm. All right, who else you got that panic meter on there, Steven?
Let's go with Ole Miss. I'm not necessarily like selling my Ole Miss to the playoff stock, to your point. But it felt like very early on in that game against LSU that they were in control, and they just had some missed opportunities, left the door open, and we saw LSU at night. Garrett Nussmeier, of course, was great in clutch situations. But now I think as we kind of turn the page into the second half of the season, one of the questions we talked about in the offseason was, could Lane keep this team together? The playoff hopes, they've diminished. At the same time, they're still in it if they can beat Georgia and run the table. But with all of the transfers and new pieces, this is going to be an interesting experiment in the NIL era to see where Ole Miss can go the rest of the way. So my panic meter is high because of the roster kind of situation. But also, I think the line of scrimmage on Saturday night showed up again. I mean, 6 sacks allowed by the offensive line and also 0 by the defensive line, especially on defense, a group that is supposed to be a difference maker group didn't quite get there on Saturday night. Could have been the difference maybe on one of those 4th downs, but they just didn't measure up at the line of scrimmage on Saturday.
Right. Now, again, they were going up against a very good LSU offensive line, but that was a man-on-man type game, and LSU came out there at least. But, I think Ole Miss certainly has got issues on the offensive line. And I don't know. You tell me, Steven. Their fans aren't going to want to hear this, but the moment it happened, I said, and I still can't believe they just disparage. That's what fans do, Steven. They leave. We got to badmouth the guy. But if they had Judkins still, and I get it, he's making all these demands, whatever. But I think they beat Kentucky. I think they beat LSU because they're missing something. And for all the stats Jackson Dart puts up, he is not like a top 3 quarterback in the country. He may have top 3 stats, but he has never been a guy that is, like a game breaker that's going to win you all these games. He's a hell of a player. I think he's the toughest quarterback in the SEC. So this is not me talking down to him, but it seemed like Judkins was the critical piece the last couple of years. I feel like they miss him desperately.
Yeah, I think that's definitely spot on, Mike. I mean, I think Henry Parrish and Ulysses Bentley and some of those other running backs are solid. And as the running backs are generally replaceable in terms of production, whether it's at the NFL or the college level. But there is sometimes that somebody's just really special, and Judkins is really special. And I think he'd make a difference, like you said, in some of these close games. I think this also speaks to portal additions on the offensive line take a long time to get acclimated to. I know they've been bringing in guys over the last couple of years. You're kind of deeper there, but that's a tricky spot to be searching for help every year. Everybody's looking for help, and there's not a lot of high impact guys. And I mentioned Lance Hurd struggling this year. May take some of these guys a long time to get acclimated. I also say this too. I did not particularly love some of the play calling at times in that game. I understand the need to go for the 70-yard bombs at times. It's also okay to take the layups at times too.
Yeah, without Trey Harris, that offense is it's just not firing. You know what?
Yeah, I thought Juice Wells had a chance to make some plays in the last couple of weeks, and certainly, he caught a long pass against South Carolina. But Trey Harris just changes so much for that offense and was definitely missed.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else you're hitting the panic button on here, Steven?
I got a few more, Mike. I'll kind of rapid fire through some of these. But how about Georgia at 7 on the panic meter? Did they overlook Mississippi State? Probably. At the same time, this is now, 2 of their last 3 games, they've been giving up a lot of yards in the secondary, and it's not a great time to be searching for answers in the secondary with Texas coming up. They've had some issues in tackling. So I'm kind of wondering here, my panic meter's high. You're going into a high profile showdown. Where is this defense? And that's kind of why it's at a 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And this is a team, you kind of tend to give them the benefit of the doubt because how successful they've been the last 3 seasons. Well, really more than that, but just winning championships. But this team ain't that. Now, can they turn it on? Can they get there? I think they still can, and we'll learn a lot about them this weekend. Is this too bold, Steven? If they get beat this weekend, which is an if. I'm not saying they will, but if they get beat this weekend, I think they could miss the playoff. Because I just said Ole Miss is winning out, so let's give them a loss there too. If they are, I mean, heck, their schedule's insane, but 9-3 at best. Do they make the playoff?
I think they'd be in difficult shape. I think in that scenario, let's just say they lose to Texas and they lose to Ole Miss. I think you need a win over a 10-win Tennessee team. Mm-hmm. So you're counting on Tennessee to beat Alabama, and certainly strength of schedule is going to come into play here. If they take Texas to the brink and only lose by a field goal, same thing for Ole Miss. That sort of plays into what the committee has said. The best teams are going to be picked. But 9-3 puts you squarely on the bubble to be sweating it out. 10-2, I think they're going to be okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, they beat Texas. I think they're a lock, just to be clear. So, I mean, that's a fine line. But that's what I'd be selling if I was Kirby this week. We beat this team, we're good. If we lose, we're putting it in people's hands to do it for us. So, yeah, I'm right there with you. And again, struggling against Kentucky, losing in the fashion they did to Bama. Mississippi State was unimpressive. I thought, heck, Auburn's been a turnover machine. They could even turn over Auburn, but I mean they controlled that game throughout. So I shouldn't poo-poo that one, but I don't know. They just don't look like elite Georgia.
Which raises the question to me: are they slow playing us for this weekend's game, and they're going to show up and look like the number one team in the country? But I think you brought up a good point there. It's a trend now. I mean, they started slow against Clemson, close call against Kentucky, 10-point win over Mississippi State team they were heavily favored by. So there's definitely a trend here. It's not a one-game blip. It's been a couple weeks now.
Mm-hmm. Who else are you panicking on here?
I've got a couple more here, Mike. Oklahoma at 6. I mean,
probably not high enough.
I think this is kind of, I got a couple teams that are kind of clustered together. It's Oklahoma at 6, Kentucky at 7, and Florida at 8. I think we kind of know what these teams are. The reason why I have Florida at 8 is, and I floated this to Mike before we started the show, is Graham Mertz's injury the excuse Florida needs to keep Billy Napier around this for 2025, especially if DJ Lagway plays well. But I think the issues for these teams are all kind of similar. For Oklahoma and Kentucky, it's offensive issues. Their sort of panic level is a little different relative to the contenders. And then on the other side of things for Florida, I mean, same old. It's like one step forward, two step back. Same issues, penalties, questionable play calling, predictable play calling. You saw a great first half of moving the ball, not cashing in, and the defense has been significantly better the last 2 weeks. It's kind of quite a in-season turnaround. But I have them as an 8 because the coaching situation is this, like I said, is that something that could happen? Maybe,
perhaps. But how about this though, Stephen? Because I thought Florida, quite frankly, I thought they played their best game of the season on Saturday.
Yeah,
and they should have beat Tennessee. I don't want to say Tennessee got lucky. I'm not a big believer in all that because Tennessee was making plays to stop them, but yeah. No ball Billy over there, low T Billy, whatever you want to call him. I mean, I clearly I think he cost him that game. So, yeah, I would probably back off the panic meter a little, but again, maybe Graham Mertz was the steady force there, because for all the hype and the great throws we've seen from Lagway, I think his future is very bright. He could be the best quarterback in this conference in a year or two. I've also seen where he's a true freshman. And how's that going to play against Kentucky? Kentucky's got a great defense. Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss. I mean, good luck, brother. Yeah, you need another tune-up in there, and they're not getting it, except Florida State. There's a tune-up, I guess, but that's going to be at the end of the game,
Yeah, it was 6 games remaining, and 4 of those at one point have been top 10 teams or are top 10 teams now. Ole Miss falling out, and a good Kentucky defense. That's a brutal schedule for a true freshman quarterback. But as we're talking about this, I'm having flashbacks to the Nico thing. Is like the talent is there. Can they put it all together? And also, I'd like to see, continue to see that Lagway's a different quarterback than Mertz. He needs to be a little bit more aggressive in your play calling downfield, but there's also a point because he's a freshman and all these tough opponents. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this goes for Florida.
Well, speaking of interesting, Stephen, let's get into the Week 8 previews because I'm fascinated by some of these games here. And we got to start with Georgia, number 5 Georgia at number 1 Texas. Texas favored by 3.5 points. It keeps growing, Steve. Oh, my word. Georgia was favored about 2 weeks ago. Not anymore. Night game, 7:30 Eastern, 6:30 Central on ABC. And just based on the numbers, Stephen, I mean, Texas, the better team statistically. What's your thoughts on this game?
This week's Super Bowl in the SEC. I mean, massive implications for the SEC title, college football playoff, potentially the Heisman Trophy if Carson Beck can come out and have a huge night. I think just on paper, what's fascinating to me is you have the Texas defense that this is by far the best offense they have played this year. And this is now, Carson Beck has been playing, obviously made some mistakes in the game against Mississippi State, but put up huge numbers. So there's going to be an opportunity here to see just how good Texas is defensively against this Georgia offense. And then on the other side of things, I am interested to see what Quinn Ewers and let's assume Isaiah Bond is able to play, what they're going to be able to do against this Georgia defense. Is Georgia's defense where they just preparing 2 weeks for Texas? Did they sleepwalk through Mississippi State? That's going to be kind of an interesting battle on Saturday night. So I think there's a ton of intrigue for by far the biggest game of the weekend on the schedule.
And this is a serious question, Stephen. Can we live in a world where Texas wins this game by a large margin? I mean, I don't know if I can handle these people anymore. If, like, say they win by 14, 20 points, something like that, will life go on, or will I cease to exist?
I think you and cousin Shane will be recording on Sunday at some point. I think what's kind of interesting to me is I kind of came in the weekend or last weekend before Friday, starting to think about this matchup and kind of thought I might be tempted to take Georgia straight up. And now I'm kind of like, I don't know if I can talk myself into it just based upon last week's games. Try not to be too much prisoner of the moment. But also, like, the elements of this game, it feels like it could be a fairly higher scoring game. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I certainly think so. But and then here will be critical. Stephen, do you have any idea off the top of your head who Texas played last season after Oklahoma?
It wasn't TCU, was it?
No, it was Houston.
Houston, that's right.
How about the year before? You probably don't know these.
Yeah.
Iowa State. How about the year before? Oklahoma State. Well, and they lost that. But COVID year, I don't take that for anything. Let's throw out COVID year 2019. Kansas, which they barely won by 2 points. The point being, Stephen, this is a new 8. Baylor the year before. Come on, get the hell out of here. It was a joke of a schedule. They had to play one team. How do they look now? Again, Oklahoma's not that good, and they whooped them, as I said they would. That was not a surprise. It should be a surprise to no one, even Oklahoma fans, even though they were stunned by it. But this is different. This is getting right up off the mat. You called it Super Bowl. This could be the game of the year for Georgia because again, if Georgia loses this, I think they're done. Not done, but they will be. You know what I mean? Like I think it could go that far for them. So you're going to get big game Kirby here. You're going to get and Georgia. Hell, they were the favorite to win every game 2 years ago, and they said, 7-5, and they went undefeated. You know what I mean? Like the nonsense they come up with. So they're not going to need any nonsense this week to be motivated. So I don't know. That's going to fascinate me. If Texas wins, buddy, they're probably going undefeated. They're probably going to win the whole national championship because I think that it'll prove that much to me if they win this game.
Watch out for the Texas A&M game later in the season too. This is definitely one of those welcome to the SEC moments that you get Oklahoma, you turn around and play a Georgia team that was pretty much the preseason favorite this year. Also, it is funny to me after watching that game on Saturday for Texas and Oklahoma is they won 34-3 and you left. They could have played better. They could have won by more, right? I mean, They left some stuff on the table. So I think that obviously it's a sign of a good team to beat somebody by 31 points and you didn't play your A game. The matchups in this game, we talked about the quarterbacks and the receivers, but also this is a big boy matchup in the trenches. The offensive lines for these two teams. We'll see if Jared Wilson can come back for Georgia at center and make a difference in this game. But this is a very, very high level, like skill talent, quarterback, offensive line. And I do wonder, like, has Georgia lulled us to sleep the last couple of weeks looking at this game? Texas coming off of the Oklahoma win. There's some interesting storylines for both on kind of where they are at this point.
Would anything be funnier if Texas won this by 21 points and then next week lost to Vanderbilt?
That would be how appropriate the season has gone, right? Vanderbilt beat Alabama and Texas.
So who do you think is the better unit here? Texas offense or Georgia defense?
I think you have to go with the Texas offense right now. I mean, I wouldn't have said that like back in the preseason. I would have just assumed that Georgia's defense would be right at the top of the SEC, but just with the way they were given a big plays to Mississippi State, we saw it against Alabama as well. Getting Isaiah Bond, Silas Bolden, Matthew Golden, the tight ends for Texas involved. It's a lot of playmakers that Georgia's going to have to account for.
And what, if anything, do you think is a advantage, maybe even a big advantage for Georgia?
I think it's advantage might be the wrong kind of wording for me to say this, but I think there has to be, if you're Georgia's offensive staff, you're looking at the offenses that Texas has played and you're saying, can they really, they've played Oklahoma, they've played Michigan, they've played a bunch of pretty mediocre offenses. And now Georgia is coming into Austin with Carson Beck and all these receivers. And I think you can move the ball here. So there's a lot of talent on this Texas defense. So I'm not trying to undersell them. It's just that I think Georgia's offense will give us a very good barometer of where this Texas defense is.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about this one, Stephen? Another, what looked like a good showdown. I don't even know if it is anymore, Stephen. Number 7, Alabama at number 11, Tennessee. Falling like a stone here. It was top 4 2 weeks ago. Alabama favored by 2.5, 3:30 Eastern, 2:30 Central on ABC. According to the game balls, though, Stephen, this is a complete toss-up here. What's your thoughts on this game?
I can't believe I'm about to say this. It's like, is Alabama's defense what Tennessee's offense needs to get back on track, right? I mean, who would have thought about that at this point of the season? We'd be saying that back in the preseason. But, man, it really is, like, for me, is like thinking about Tennessee's offense and can they get on track and how much Alabama has struggled defensively. And I think about how many times that whether it's motion or misdirection or these guys for Alabama's defense were out of place, like Tennessee had this success 2 years ago up in Knoxville of getting Alabama safeties all out of sorts in that game. So it does feel like Tennessee, there are some opportunities here to get back on track. The other side of it is if you're Alabama, you got to have a lot of confidence in Jalen Milroe coming into this game. And if Alabama's offensive line holds up, there are plenty of opportunities to make plays against this Tennessee secondary. I suspect Ryan Williams will be probably more involved this week other than 4 catches for 32 yards. So this one feels very much in toss-up territory for me. Tennessee at home, some advantages there, but do you trust this offense even against an Alabama defense that has struggled to be a big question?
Which coach do you think is under more pressure to win this one, though, Josh Heupel or Kalen DeBoer?
I think it's got to be Kalen DeBoer. I certainly think obviously the Heupel winning the Florida game was good for him. Winning the Alabama game would be even better. But if you're Kalen DeBoer, a lot of questions have been building the last couple of weeks. And I think, do people think that he's in over his head in the SEC? I'm sure some fans do. And this would be a good opportunity to go on the road and sort of answer some of those doubts.
Right. But he is known for being a big game coach, correct? I mean, he's beaten Sark, he's beaten Lanning, he's beaten Kirby now. I mean, I don't know if people consider Josh Heupel, an elite coach. I certainly thought he was till these last 2 weeks, but I'm kidding. But again, that would scare me as a Tennessee fan is just the big name or the big game coach that DeBoer is. But hell, you can't say that and then turn around and lose to Vanderbilt and should have lost to South Carolina either. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, I just don't know what to make of this football game. And I know you're kind of kidding, but not really. This could be a get-right game, but I thought last week was going to be the get-right game against Florida's defense, which has been pitiful. So they couldn't do anything on them. I don't know how much confidence I have in Tennessee's offense to manufacture much against Alabama's defense, as struggling as they might be. But certainly this is going to be a game to get it right. And you think at some point, which I think it's fair to say Saturday night, Tennessee's home crowd was an advantage. I think these fans will be even more ramped up for this one. But I think it's going to come down to what we've kind of been hitting at here is how do they defend Jalen Milroe? Because Tennessee's got an outstanding defensive line, but this is a weird game where you don't necessarily want to be rushing him nonstop because you don't want him to break contain. Keenan Peely's out for the season, unfortunately. I mean, that's a big blow. So I could certainly see, and I'll probably predict this, I think this could be a Jalen Milroe goes crazy game. Now, at the same time, I heard someone talk about this as well. I mean, look at who he's played the last couple of weeks. Georgia, Vanderbilt. You can snicker at Vanderbilt all you want. They got after him a little bit. And then South Carolina certainly got after him. I mean, he's probably a little beaten up right now. So I don't know. I'm kind of talking in circles here.
He looked a little tentative on some of those runs in the second half. Maybe it was just me, sitting in my office watching all these games and
Right.
Trying to make sense of what was happening. It does feel like Alabama has the most, or I guess if you're trying to predict this game, I think putting a lot of faith in Jalen Milroe is usually a pretty good idea. It also feels like strength versus strength, Alabama's offense against Tennessee's defense, and weakness versus weakness right now, Tennessee's offense against Alabama's defense. So ton of interest, third Saturday in October. I mean, it doesn't get much better than this, potential playoff elimination game too.
Let me phrase it this way, Steven. Let's say both these quarterbacks have similar statistics to where I'm going to give them each 2 touchdowns and 1 turnover. Nico has 1 turnover, Milroe has 1 turnover, and they each have 2 touchdowns. If that's the only information you're given, who would you say wins this game?
I take Tennessee. That would mean that Nico played well, and I trust Tennessee's defense more than Alabama right now.
Mm-hmm. That's what I wanted to hear. I'm kidding.
Is Shane feeding you these questions?
Well, but I guess just the point being, like, if Jalen Milroe doesn't go bananas here and score 4 or 5 touchdowns, because I don't think there's any way Nico does that, given the way he's playing. But basically, you just can't let Milroe beat you.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. If I'm Tennessee, I want somebody other than Jalen Milroe to beat me. And to your point, Keenan Peely being out is a huge loss in a game like this where you're going to need that second level to defend Jalen Milroe. So tough spot for Tim Banks, but also think seeing how Alabama's offensive line has given up pressure to Vanderbilt and South Carolina. James Pierce played well last week against Florida. I'd feel pretty good if I was Tennessee about getting some pressure or at least causing enough havoc with that defensive front on Saturday.
Right. And this is a great time, Steven, to announce one other sponsor that is just perfectly timed. Because the way Tennessee's playing, Cousin Shane and I will be utilizing BetterHelp this week. If you're unfamiliar, BetterHelp online therapy can't be beat. Steven, if you're thinking about getting into therapy, give BetterHelp a try. All you got to do, fill out this brief questionnaire, and they pair you with a licensed therapist, and you can switch at any time if you're unhappy with the therapist you get at no charge. It's all online. You don't have to go anywhere. You can do it at home. So head on over to betterhelp.com/SEC. Give 10% off your first month. That's HELP.com. BetterHelp, HELP.com/SEC. Get 10% off BetterHelp online therapy. Cannot recommend it enough, Stephen, the way Tennessee's offense has been playing.
I was worried about you and Shane, and I think it was a cousin Phil last week who was he was sound pretty concerned about Tennessee's offense last week. So rightfully so. So I was worried about you guys on Saturday night, and then of course with Tennessee pulling it out, I felt a little bit better about you guys. So
Oh, we're like Kirby. We're just riding the waves over here. You know what? That's what he said.
Oh, you didn't shove anybody this week, right?
Not yet.
Yeah.
All right. Speaking of big time matchup, this one is going to be wild. I think, Steven. LSU, number 8 LSU at Arkansas. LSU favored by a field goal. Yeah, another night game. Credit Arkansas getting these night games. SEC used to hate you, only give you 11 a.m. kicks. Now you got back-to-back top 10 opponents at home, at night. What a showdown this could be. Rivalry game. And this is one of those, Steven, I don't know how you feel about these, but when it's a rivalry and then only like one team kind of like really considers it a rivalry, I always give that team an edge. I don't know truly how much of a rivalry LSU considers this, but it is the Golden Boot. What's your thoughts on this matchup?
I think LSU better take this game seriously. If whether or not they consider it a rivalry, I think if I'm Arkansas, I love the timing of this matchup. You're getting LSU off the big win against Ole Miss at your place on Saturday night. The crowd, we saw it when they played Tennessee. Unbelievable fans at Razorback Stadium. I think Arkansas can very much win this game on Saturday. Go back 2 years ago when Arkansas played LSU. After beating Alabama, remember LSU barely won that game.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks to some heroics by Harold Perkins in that game. So that kind of goes to the theme of this game is Arkansas. The timing of it really favors them. The biggest question is what's the status of Taylor Green? Is he going to be at full go 100%? They're going to need his mobility to win this game. So I think the injuries for Arkansas will be critical. And also how fast can LSU kind of turn the page from a big win to get refocused for what should be a very motivated Arkansas team on Saturday night.
Mm-hmm. And I know Sam Pittman spoke today. He said, we hope Taylor Green will be able to go, but we'll see by Wednesday. So they're playing coy as they should. But let's assume he plays 2 weeks prepare and rest up. Man, what a showdown! And all of a sudden, if Arkansas can get to 5-2, what a run they'd be on. And speaking of the timing as well, LSU coming off an emotional, physical game that they never led until the moment they took the the lead at overtime to win it here. But man, is this even an upset? You think, Steven, if Arkansas wins?
It'd be an upset by the spread,
Right.
but I think based on just the dynamics around it, it very much feels like it wouldn't shock me at all, just because of the timing of it. But also one thing to consider too for LSU, looking at the schedule, A&M and then Alabama, like these next 3 games seem very critical. We'll see what happens with Florida and now Vanderbilt, also a much tougher game than we anticipated. So these next 3 games are going to be critical. And if you're LSU, I know you're coming off a big win. You're looking at A&M and Alabama. That's why this game against Arkansas is pretty dangerous. One other factor here for Arkansas is, let's just say Taylor Green is not 100% or he can't go. They've had 2 weeks to get Malachi Singleton ready. So I think Petrino having a couple weeks to get a quarterback ready could be a huge advantage for Arkansas. Obviously, you'd much rather have Taylor Green.
Right, and I'm kind of curious too, which I think you deserve some props for giving some credit to Travis Williams. But I'll be curious to see. Clearly, he came up with a fantastic game plan to stifle Tennessee. What will he do against LSU and their dynamic offensive line and quarterback? And so I think that'll be critical. I would think with a banged-up quarterback, and again, let's hope Taylor Green's 100%. But I think that's asking a lot. Again, hopefully he plays, and hopefully he is 100%. But let's say he's somewhat limited. You got to think that they don't want to necessarily get into a shootout here. LSU struggles to run the football, somewhat one-dimensional. If Arkansas can really run the ball like they have this year, again, I'm going to throw up their stats here. They're pretty friendly here. Top 20 rushing attack. Meanwhile, LSU's got a top 94 rushing attack. Again, you could chew up clock. You can limit the snaps, keep Garrett Nussmeier off the field. I think that'll be critical for Arkansas getting a win here. And, beating Tennessee, that has completely changed the narrative. And there's danger in that too, because if you turn around and drop one, then fans are, oh God, Sam Pittman's got to go. You know what I mean? But if you can build on that, you get 2 top 10 wins. Sam Pittman could go from the hottest seat in the country to I think he would be guaranteed he's coming back next year.
Also, maybe some coach of the year consideration if they keep, winning these games. And it's Mike, it's something you and I talked about in the preseason, which was Arkansas' schedule was challenging, but you also get a lot of these games at home. And with the environment that Arkansas has, with what the strides they've made defensively, with how difficult it can be to defend Taylor Green, there are a lot of factors that can work in their favor. LSU's giving up over 200 rushing yards a game in SEC contests this year. So there are some opportunities here. And I am also going to be sort of like focused in on watching to see if Landon Jackson is taking on Will Campbell or Emory Jones. There's a lot of intriguing matchups in the trenches. So to your point, I think can Arkansas get some pressure on Nussmeier if they're able to run the ball, turn it into like a 19-14 game like we saw against Tennessee? I think that definitely benefits them, especially if Taylor Green is less than full strength.
And let me ask you this, Stephen, big if here, not predicting it, but if Arkansas can beat LSU, they got after that at Mississippi State, Ole Miss at home, Texas at home, Louisiana Tech at home, at Missouri. If they beat LSU, is 9-3 off the, is that believable? Meaning they would drop only one remaining game.
I don't think that's really that crazy. So if you beat LSU, I mean, you're certainly going to be favored against Mississippi State, Louisiana Tech, maybe even Missouri at this point.
Right.
The Ole Miss game, Ole Miss gets Georgia the week after they play Arkansas, so that's a tricky timing, and you get an off week to get ready for Texas. So I love this home schedule for Arkansas, and that's why I think they've got some chances to still pull some upsets regardless of what happens on Saturday.
Now, how about LSU? This is something I asked cousin Shane, where there's often, and you would know better than we would probably, but there's teams like I threw out Tennessee in '98. There was, the Ohio State team that had Maurice Claret. I mean, there's many throughout college football history that are solid, but very few to no one picking them to win a national championship. Could LSU fit that formula, as it were? I mean, if let me ask it to you this way. Maybe this is a better way to ask it. Would you rather be like Ole Miss and blow it all these teams out, and then you get in a dogfight and you can't respond, or would you rather be like LSU and getting in all these dogfights and finding ways to win? I mean, me personally, I think that's what a good team does, is find ways to win, and you start winning these dirty games. Like, let's say they beat Arkansas by 2 or 3, just like they did Ole Miss and South Carolina. They already have the belief, it looks like. But could they be like a team of destiny? Because if I'm sitting here telling you they are winning at Arkansas, I understand at A&M it's very difficult, Alabama at home, at Florida, Vanderbilt, and Oklahoma. But they just beat Ole Miss. If I know they're beating Arkansas, I think they could conceivably, I'm not predicting it, but I think they could beat all these teams.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think if they beat Arkansas, I think maybe the only game they won't be a favorite in is at Texas A&M. I think they'd be favored over Alabama at this point, unless we see a dramatic turnaround in Alabama's defense the next couple weeks. So I think I would rather be battle tested in some of these SEC games. They've already went toe to toe with Ole Miss. They won on the road at South Carolina. You have close victories at home and the road, and you're battle tested. You've got a quarterback who can come through in the clutch. And also, I think they're figuring some things out defensively. I mean, it's not going to be a shutdown group, but they've figured out ways to manufacture a pass rush. They've got some guys in this defense who can get better with more snaps. So this LSU team, much like A&M, I think can only get better from here.
Mm-hmm. All right. How about this one, Steven? This is a very intriguing matchup. Boy, both these teams desperately need it. Auburn at Missouri. Steven, Missouri's 2 weeks to prepare. Or no, excuse me. I felt like they were on a bye. It was Auburn that was on a bye, but Missouri played UMass, which was essentially a bye. Missouri's number 19 in the country. They're favored by just 4.5, though, against Auburn. This is going to be an early one, 11 a.m. Central, 12 Eastern on ESPN. And this just has the feeling of the old JP Sports drunk morning. I mean, something wild's going to happen in this one. I can just sense it. How about you?
It does, because I think the feeling for me, just right off the bat, looking at this matchup, is it feels very much like Auburn has lost these games. Who are they going to beat that they're an underdog to that they probably don't have business winning? And it feels like it could be this game. And so it feels like a dangerous game for Missouri. And on the Auburn side, having that extra time to prepare, and yes, they're 2-4, but their offense has been finding ways to move the ball. And Missouri defensively is not what they were last year. So you could conceivably see, hey, it comes together this week. They don't turn the ball over. They don't have penalties. Missouri's not able to generate the big plays. Brady Cook is a little bit off. And you can easily see how Auburn can go on the road and win this game. One factor that I think is going to be probably critical for both teams on Saturday, and it's super simple, is turnovers. Because Missouri has lost 2 this season, Auburn has lost 15. So in a game that feels very much like a toss-up according to Vegas, feels like that and quarterback play is going to be crucial here.
Mm-hmm. And to the best of my knowledge, we don't know the status of Luther Burden. Hopefully he can play in this game, but he got banged up against UMass and did not return, so that's going to be critical.
So I think ESPN reported on Monday that sounds like he'll be able to go.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not like returning to practice. It was kind of worded awkwardly, but it made it seem like he'd be ready to go, but we'll see.
Yeah, and this might seem like a silly question, Steven, but I think it's a fair one. Which quarterback do you have more confidence in this matchup, Brady Cook or Peyton Thorne?
Well, that's a good question. I still think Brady Cook is going to turn this around 1 week. Don't you? I mean, I know we're 6 games in, so
I don't know. I think they kind of are who they are now. And then they got to find different ways. And let me say it this way, because I was listening to another show, and they were trying to figure out who's got the best set of weapons in the conference, and I think you could certainly make the case, and I'm not saying best individual one receiver. I'm saying a collection with a running back, with a tight end. And I think the case could be made for Missouri. Now, Missouri's problem is quarterback. Left tackle has been a real issue. The guy from SMU, I don't think they got what they were hoping out of him. But when you talk about the collection of receivers, the duo at running back, tight end, Missouri's got all the other pieces that everybody covets, but they're missing some big ones here. So, yeah, I don't know. What's your thoughts on that, Steve? Could they have the best skill talent, essentially, I guess is what I'm asking you, in the SEC?
I don't think that's crazy at all. I still like, Texas and Georgia are certainly up there. One thing is you were talking about the offensive line that sort of goes back to what you and I have talked about a lot too, which is portal additions on the offensive line are very much hit or miss. I mean, even if they start at lower levels or power conferences, it takes time, it seems like, for these guys to come in and play, and everybody's looking for help. So no matter, if you're a backup at Toledo or a starter at Ball State, you're probably going to get some attention in the portal because everybody's looking for offensive line help. But I think that also gets at the thing here with Missouri, which is if they can clean up some of these things on the offensive line, they can get Brady Cook on track. Mike, they've got the weapons at running back and receiver and at tight end to make this offense go. And if they want to make a run at the playoff, it's just got to start here on Saturday by beating Auburn.
Right. And then, I mean, no chance what Hugh Freeze came out and said, right? Well, there's a lesser than roster. That's never going to come back to bite him, but that's perfect bulletin board material that, hell, I may even just DM it to Drink. Just make sure he saw it. You know what?
So we had the blanket. I wonder what he could come up with this week, right?
All right. How about this matchup, Steven? Another. I mean, we're just chock full of great potential matchups this weekend in the SEC. Kentucky at Florida, both, I think, on the brink of collapse here, desperately need to get this one. Florida, 2-point favorite, so almost a complete toss-up. It's a night game, though, 7:45 Eastern, 6:45 Central on the SEC Network. And unfortunately, Graham Mertz out for the season. He tore his ACL against Tennessee. So we're going with DJ Lagway here. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. But first start against an SEC team for old DJ Lagway here. But how do you see this one?
We've had the Sunglasses Bowl. This is the Desperation Bowl on Saturday nights. No doubt about it, because both teams desperately need a victory. For Kentucky's offense now, they have played 4 SEC games. They have scored 4 touchdowns in those games. This feels very much like a 13-10, 17-13, 20-17 type of game. I think the group that you trust the most has got to be that Kentucky defense. Florida's defense has played better. Kentucky's offense has struggled. So this very much feels like, what can DJ Lagway do against a very good Kentucky defense in a game where points, field position, turnovers probably all going to be magnified, and Kentucky has dominated the recent series too.
Mm-hmm. Who has a coaching edge in this matchup? Mark Stoops and Billy Napier.
I would take Mark Stoops, I think.
Yeah.
I mean,
well, anytime that's the answer, the other guy is not doing so hot. You know what?
I think the correct answer could be, what is Brad White going to cook up on defense in this game for Kentucky? Right?
Would you agree with me, though, that the loser of this game, the season's going to spiral potentially out of control?
I think for Florida, especially, just because of that schedule. Kentucky, with the defense that they have, it feels like that can keep them in it every week. From a scheduling standpoint, what Kentucky has, what Auburn and Tennessee, it's a tough slate still for Kentucky. So I think just for bowl purposes, it feels like the Kentucky needs to get this one because Auburn's not going to be a gimme. They'll get Murray State, but Louisville, Texas, Tennessee, those are going to be hard to win.
Right. Yeah, a loss here would drop Kentucky to 1-4 in conference play. Florida would drop to 1-3. If they were to lose this game with the win over Mississippi State. So, oh man, this is going to be an ugly one. But strangely enough, after I don't even know the number, what was it, like 38 consecutive wins? Kentucky's won 3 in a row now. They snapped that streak, and I think it's like 4 out of 5 or something like that. They've beaten Florida.
Yeah, you said earlier that Missouri Auburn was the JP game of the week. This one feels like it,
right? Yeah, I was overlooking this one, of course. All right, how about this one, Steven? 2 weeks to prepare here for the Aggies. They're big favorites. This is the largest spread in the conference games here. Texas A&M 15-point favorite at Mississippi State, 3:15 Central, 4:15 Eastern on SEC Network. Will Texas A&M keep the hot streak rolling?
Mike, I think they're going to. And I think, number one, the 2 weeks to get ready for this game certainly have an impact. Mississippi State has now played Texas, off week, Georgia, and they're just undermanned. It is a difficult spot to play in Starkville. But it also, kind of going back to what we talked about earlier with Mike Elko, this A&M team is getting better by the week. And Connor Wigman has had a couple of weeks to get healthy, get closer to 100%. It certainly sounds like he's going to be at that strength on Saturday. It really feels like A&M, all the ingredients are coming together. The other thing is, I think looking at how far Texas A&M has come, every game is in sort of that must-win, no letdown space. And I think under Jimbo Fisher, I think you could easily see a letdown. I think Mike Elko will keep this team focused, even though it is a tough spot. And just some of the matchups just really favor A&M here. The defensive front for the Aggies against the Mississippi State offensive line. Really like the way Michael Van Buren has been playing in a tough spot. But this A&M defense, it just seems to get better every week. So I think the matchups and the timing favor Texas A&M here.
Mm-hmm. And I know there was a bye in there, but playing Texas, playing Georgia, both on the road in their last 2 games. They get to come home to Starkville, but that could be very difficult for Mississippi State. But what would it say about Jeff Lebby and company if let's say they do basically the same thing, where even if people say they don't believe in moral victories, and then they're like, well, what about a moral victory? So maybe I do believe in them for some teams. Like Mississippi State, I think I would buy that. If let's say they lost by 7 or 10 or something like that, I think that would be something to build upon. Would you?
Yeah, I do. And I think just thinking about how the Texas and Georgia games went, I think the kind of the consensus was they were going to be blowouts. And the Georgia game certainly wasn't. And they gave Texas a lot of trouble early. So I think they just fared better. And I think maybe there might be some confidence there for Mississippi State that, hey, we just, we played two of the best top 5 teams in the country. And, we took Georgia to the brink. We played Texas well. And even in a year zero situation, you're looking for moral victories, like you said, for Mississippi State. So the fact that they have played well at times against some of the top teams, and you've got a quarterback in Michael Van Buren who's maybe building for the future, if you can take Texas A&M and push them, that sort of just gives you a little bit of confidence for the rest of the way, because this is year zero and there's a lot of heavy lifting to be done in rebuilding, and you're just unfortunately looking for these type of moral victories at this point.
Mm-hmm. And you hit on this already, but I'll reiterate it, that I think the biggest challenge for Elko and company this week is just consistency. Getting pumped up. You're 3-0 in conference. You look red hot. It doesn't matter who you're playing. We have seen that in this conference. It does not matter. 16 can beat 1 seemingly this year. So I'm not saying that Mississippi State's going to win, but if they don't show up and they don't at least play with their B game on the road, they could lose this game.
Maybe it helps Mike Elko and Texas A&M that Mississippi State just gave Georgia all it could handle too. For motivation, focusing perspective, just the fact that they were able to do what they, if they lost 52-7, I might be a little bit more worried about it. But because it was close, maybe that sort of gets Texas A&M's attention here.
Mm-hmm. All right, what's your thoughts on this one, Steven? I think it's first one to 3 points. We'll win it. South Carolina at Oklahoma. Oklahoma is favored by 3. I don't think that's the over-under. I think that's what Oklahoma's favored by. 11:45 a.m. Central Time, 12:45 Eastern on the SEC Network. What a showdown here.
Mike, it does feel like the first one to like 10 might win this game. These two teams feel very similar to some extent. You have two teams with pretty good defenses. Also, the defensive lines for both teams probably going to create a lot of havoc. There's 2 stats just on the surface of this matchup that jumped out to me, which was these two teams have combined to lose 19 turnovers and allow 46 sacks this year. So it feels like whichever offensive line could just play a little bit better, whichever quarterback can maybe create some plays off schedule, some short fields, like that's probably going to decide this game. And also maybe a little bit of beamer ball here on the road, block punt, something like that. It definitely feels like a lower scoring defensive struggle here.
Mm-hmm. And maybe the same thing I asked you about Florida, Kentucky, but could this be a calamity for the team that drops this one?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, both of these teams, when you look at their schedule, there's not an easy path to 6 victories. I think the interesting thing about South Carolina is at different times this year, my confidence level has been rising with them. And then the Ole Miss game, it sort of dropped. But if the South Carolina that shows up against Alabama and LSU shows up on Saturday, I mean, their schedule is very difficult, but I could easily talk myself into finding 6 wins. And the same thing is certainly true with Oklahoma. If Michael Hawkins continues to develop, you're at 4 wins already. You're going to beat Maine. So if you get South Carolina this week, even with a difficult schedule, I think you can kind of fight your way maybe to get to 7.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be a very telling game. I really do think now, and it's going to be a battle. It's going to be a war. You got 2 great defenses, but I don't know. I don't have. I'll just put it this way: I don't have faith in either offensive coordinator to really generate a plan that is going to take advantage of the other side, if that makes sense.
Of the games that Oklahoma and South Carolina has played this year, could Dow Loggins have maybe had a more competent plan at times, sometimes than Oklahoma? Is that crazy?
Yeah, I mean that's not crazy, which is pathetic. But,
concerning.
Yeah. But again, this being in Norman, and I'll spin it this way, Stephen. If this was, say, no disrespect, because heck, South Carolina's nearly just knocked off Alabama, but I would think for some fan bases, maybe like a Georgia, or maybe that was part of it last week, Alabama. They're not going to be too psyched up for South Carolina. I think Oklahoma is, because it's all new and these are new opponents in a new conference. These fans really got to show out on Saturday, give the Sooners an edge, because that may be what decides it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think we see this, in different conferences and also in the SEC, that home field advantage can be huge, and especially in a game like this, if you can create a couple false starts, and you're asking, Lenore Sellers to operate at a 1st and 15, and with the way both these offenses have been playing this year, I will take my chances with 1st and 15, 2nd and 13s, in long yardage situations with both these teams trying to execute. So the crowd, the defense, all that could be very big for Oklahoma on Saturday.
All right, then last one here. I don't have a graphic. Didn't have time. Ball State at Vanderbilt. Wait, can you tell us anything? Is this going to be any kind of are we at the point, Stephen, where Vanderbilt's going to be overlooking people now because they're so red hot?
I mean, if you're Vanderbilt, I don't think you can necessarily afford to overlook people, considering you lost to Georgia State earlier this year. But I think Georgia State's better than Ball State, not by much. So if there is a positive here for Vanderbilt, Ball State is probably one of the 15 to 20 bottom teams in college football. 2-4 to start the season. They lost 62-0 to Miami a few weeks ago. Also, to compare, this Ball State team beat Kent State, that Kent State team that Tennessee blew out, by 2 points.
Oh,
so that kind of just gives you an idea that they're very much in that discussion to be 9, 10, 11 in the MAC. If you're looking for players to watch, Tanner Koziel, their tight end, their quarterback, Caden Somoza, both pretty solid players in the MAC, could give Vanderbilt some trouble, but Ball State's giving up 46 points a game on defense. That's a good opportunity for Diego Pavia to put up some big numbers on Saturday.
If Vanderbilt wins on Saturday, and I don't even think that's an if, but let's say Vanderbilt wins, beats Ball State, and let's say Texas beats Georgia, does Vanderbilt get college game day for old Texas at Vanderbilt?
Oh man, I hope so. That'd be awesome, wouldn't it? I mean, Diego Pavia just needs to be a guest on game day for the whole thing.
Yeah, what a wild scene that. I hope it happens for Vanderbilt's sake, not for Georgia fans' sake. But again, that would be pretty wild, wouldn't it? I mean, of all the things that happen, that'd be even stranger than Cal getting college game day, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, because what Vanderbilt's had it one other time, it was that game against Auburn. I think it was the year where it was like Bobby Johnson was the head coach there, and of course that was the year they were pretty good. But yeah, that would be pretty special for Vanderbilt to get it this season after beating Alabama. Chance to go to a bowl game, number 1 Texas potentially coming in.
Right, I know. So I mean, the stars are aligning on the West End there, and I'm here for it. So, Stephen, we went very long on this one. Anything else to close us out?
Man, Mike, I'm just looking forward to these games this weekend, and I can't wait to see what happens. We've already had this chaos. Let's see what chaos is to come this weekend.
Right. And before we go, as always, can you remind the folks how to follow you, how to find your work?
Absolutely. AthlonSports.com is where you can read all my work, and you can check me out on Twitter at AthlonSteven and Steven LCFB over on Facebook and Instagram.
All right, Stephen, we appreciate you stopping by and dropping all this knowledge. We appreciate each and every one of you for hanging out. We'll catch you on the next one.